Thanks, Yeah, thank you. I think the regulation of the horse racing industry is an important function, although there is a certain paradox or oxymoron in the idea of horse racing being an industry, and the use or misuse of animals to generate profit is something which I am somewhat uncomfortable about. I'm from Newbridge in County Kildare. I've grown up beside the Curragh, and I have a long history. Part of my DNA, if you like, comes from that background of knowing horses and horse racing, and indeed in respecting horses and animals. And I think, while in some ways the point has often been made that elite racehorses get treated better than many human beings in terms of the standard of living and the care of attention that they get, that's in part true. But of course we also know that elite athletes pay an enormous cost for their dedication to the sport that they engage in. And unlike humans, horses don't necessarily have a say in that activity. So I do think we need to be balanced, because while recognising that horse racing generates revenue, it is indeed an industry, makes a multi-million euro earnings every year. The nuclear industry, the arms industry are industries also, but which many people would object to on ethical grounds. So creating employment in and of itself is not reason enough for an activity to exist, and I think we need to be balanced when we deal with these issues. And I'd like to maybe put some of the other points that haven't come out in the debate so far to this debate at the moment. And I think we'd have to say that horse racing is often cruel and unpleasant. We call it a sport, but it's one that leads to dreadful injuries for horses who race, and inevitably ends up in the slaughter of horses that don't make the grade. And we know, sadly, from the boom years that there was a rampant, for example, overbreeding of horses, and when the crash hit, obviously these horses were utterly slaughtered in their thousands. 4,618 thoroughbreds were slaughtered in licensed abattoirs in the Republic of Ireland in 2011, and God knows how many others, thousands, were slaughtered in registered knackers yards, as it were. In 2012, we know, for example, that 24,362 horses were of all kinds were slaughtered in Ireland. But the problem I have with the bill that the Minister has before us at the moment is that there's been no legislation, no regulation whatsoever brought in to deal with the overbreeding of racehorses. And the market, if you like everything else, dictates and decides. And I think it's a missed opportunity that we're not putting measures in this piece of legislation here today. Now, according to Animal Aid in the UK, approximately 1 in every 37 horses who start a season's racing will have perished by the end of it, and they'll have died as a result of a racecourse or training injury, or they'll have been killed as a result of the fact that they are deemed to be no longer financially viable. 82% of flat race horses older than 3 years of age suffer from bleeding lungs. That's exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, which can cause blood to leak from the nostrils. 4 gastric ulcers are present in no fewer than 93% of horses in training, in whom the condition gets progressively worse. That's a fact, and that's the cost to horses of our horse racing industry. And the facts show that when these horses are retired, the conditions improve and their welfare improves. So I would have liked to have seen this bill lend more attention to what happens to the fate of retired racehorses, because it is often a dismal one. And I think it's really disappointing of this minister, who is probably not got the worst of reputations in terms of animal welfare issues, but that he didn't, and maybe it's still not, it's still salvageable at this stage, but that you didn't seize on the opportunity in this bill to dedicate funds from the Horse and Greyhound Fund for programmes in relation to retraining and rehoming ex-racehorses. I don't know why that wasn't seized in this bill, and I really think that the Minister should address it and look at it now. I mean, the Irish Horse Welfare Trust runs the only such programme that exists in Ireland. It's part funded by Horse Racing Ireland and the Irish Horse Race Trainers Association. But the reality is that with hundreds of racehorses being retired every year, further funding could have ensured that none of these horses ended up being abandoned, shot or slaughtered. It shouldn't be the case that any of them do, having dedicated themselves to the altar of profit for the 2 or 3 years that they were racing. And I think given the millions that are sloshing around in the horse racing industry, it is a bit shocking. And the facts are there that of the 401 horses that were seized by the ISPCA between 2008 and 2014, because they were living in conditions too atrocious to be left in, that around 10% of them were thoroughbreds. Now, I know, Minister, you actually are somebody who takes great offence at wanton cruelty in relation to animals and in particularly in relation to horses. But that's a fact, and we should be looking at this bill to look at diverting resources into dealing with retired racehorses. And I think that given that these animal welfare concerns exist and they're out there with regard to horse racing, I'm surprised that the bill doesn't stipulate that somebody from an animal welfare background should sit on the board of Horse Racing Ireland. Now, I know that the bill does say that the chairman and ministers of the board of Horse Racing Ireland will be appointed by the minister, having regard to creating a balance between the different interests in the horse racing industry. I think that's very, very vague. Where are the interests of the horses in that situation? Horse racing and horse betting and so on is a multi-million euro industry. The welfare of the animals who make all this possible has to be factored in somewhere on that, and I really think that that could be tightened up in the legislation that's before us. I know other deputies have mentioned the fact that no specific provision is made for representatives of horse owners to sit on the Media Rights Committee. Given that media rights money pay to race course wouldn't exist without owners, it's probably a legitimate enough point that they should be given some involvement in that regard. But I do think one of the areas that could be improved is with regard to the withholding of funds. Because this is an industry. It's all about profit, and money talks, and money has the influence in terms of whether unorthodox or unacceptable behaviour is addressed or not. And in that sense, I do think that while the bill makes provisions for the withholding of funds by the Minister to Horse Racing Ireland or Bord na Gán under certain circumstances, and I welcome that, for example, if they don't furnish accounts and so on, I don't think that goes far enough, and I think we should be doing a lot more in terms of that. Because, for example, at the moment, Bord na Gán can decide to pass on public taxpayers' money to, for example, the Irish Coursing Club, as they did in 2014, with nearly €14,000 going to coursers for DNA sampling and €92,057 going to Sporting Press Limited, a subsidiary of the Coursing Club. I find that absolutely reprehensible, that monies and taxpayers' money is being diverted for hare coursing and coursing. I find that nauseating, and I'm quite sure that the overwhelming majority of Irish taxpayers feel the same. There's no sanction in this bill for withholding funds to Bord na Gán for such purposes, and I think it's too good an opportunity to miss. We should be doing this. Public funding for coursing is seriously sick in a society that claims to be civilised, and I really think we need to do more with this legislation in this regard. I mean, Bord na Gán, in their response to the Indicon report, which was absolutely damning of their activity, said that they would make additional contributions to the Retired Greyhound Trust when resources permit. Big deal. Absolutely, yippee, aren't they great? Something that could have been stipulated, to be honest, as a condition for the drawdown of funds from the Horse and Greyhound Fund in this bill could have been that a certain percentage would go to the Retired Greyhound Trust and to other welfare initiatives. And I still think it's not too late for us to look at that and putting that in as a stipulation. I mean, sanctioning Bord na Gán for not submitting accounts is important. It's great. We all love exemplary accounting skills. But to be honest with you, sanctioning them for poor animal welfare practices is far more serious and beneficial, and I think is something that we need to be building in a lot more in this bill. So if we're talking about regulation, let's put it to the heart of the bill and to the animals who are the source of the profit in the first place.